Hey guys, I am going to give you some information on Chapter 40. What I hope for you to get from this is to just see a broad overview of an introduction to ecology and what ecologists study. I'm not expecting you to really have anything memorized from this. When you do your Socrative, it's open notes. And I said I would do about 25 minutes today and about 25 minutes tomorrow. If I don't finish Chapter 40, by the end of those two segments, 25-ish minute segments, then I'm just going to go ahead and cut off content for the year, basically, which is kind of weird. That feels kind of weird to say that. But I think that at that point, you will have gotten a pretty good overview of what ecologists do and what they study and what the interests are. So if you ever do take a class that is based on ecology, these are the types of things that you would be studying, which a lot of you, if you are going to be a biology major, you'll probably take a class based on this. Ecology is not difficult. There's a little bit of math involved, and so I'll go through some of the math. I pretty sure if I give you a calculation on the Socrative, it's going to be very easy, and you'll see it's just plugging into a formula. So I'm going to recap a little bit from the Zoom meeting yesterday. It was a great meeting with all of the classes. I think I just want to reiterate that everyone's done a really great job so far, participating, turning things in, and just being accountable for the work. I think I said this before, but just wanted to say again, none of us trained for this. You have not trained to be distant learners, and I have never trained to be a distance teacher. So I appreciate everyone kind of bearing with me as I tried to adjust myself based on the situation and as it evolves. So what I have decided is that test prep will start next week. And I think I have come up with a pretty good plan to cater to all three types of students. There are three types of students currently right now in the AP biology classes. The students that want more biology and not just a test review, students that are worried about their AP exam score, and that really is the only thing on their mind, mostly the only thing on their mind right now, because they are either juniors and they need that AP score for the record because they will be going through the process that you seniors went through, and their AP score really does matter to them. And so I want to make sure that I acknowledge that and that I honor their what what they're wanting for the class. And then I have a third type of student that maybe just wants a little bit more choice and participation, may not have an interest in biology anymore, or maybe never really did, and isn't worried about the exam score and maybe doesn't want to be forced into anything. There will be some accountability. I do have to do that to a certain extent. So what I've come up with is a schedule, a 5-week schedule where every Monday students are going to get a choice between a Labster or an HHMI. If you are worried about your AP score, I do recommend, even though it can be frustrating for some students, to do the Labster. That's going to help you the most with interpreting graphs and the collecting data and the experiment design, which is going to be important for the AP test. If you're doing the HHMI, I'm going to try to thoughtfully select one that does still have to do with the topic that we're reviewing, but will also give you more an extension to your knowledge and a little bit more interesting information. Tuesday, I'll do a basic review of vocabulary and biological processes. Wednesday will be, and this is kind of vague, but it will be a little bit more higher level review. I'll try to relate the topic that we're reviewing to some kind of concept that has to do with medicine. Thursday's FRQ practice for everyone. It will be a 22 or 25-minute FRQ that everybody times their self with, and then they bring that to the Friday Zoom meeting. And as a class, I will not ask anyone to report their score. I will ask for volunteers that maybe want to discuss the FRQ, but you will score yourself and just do kind of a self-assessment, and I'll help you through that when we're in the Zoom meeting. Anywhere you see a star or an asterisk, that is when attendance will be taken. I should have put a little asterisk right there, but that's when attendance will be taken. And so as you can see here, the accountability is lowered just a little bit just to accommodate everyone and their needs. For this chapter, I really just want to go over, like I said, a basic overview of ecology, abiotic factors, and and biotic factors and how those both contribute to the formation of each type of biome. I'll go a little bit over this the types of freshwater and marine biomes, although I'm sure that you're familiar with most of those. And then I'll go over a little bit the terrestrial biomes and their characteristics. And then we'll get into population ecology, and I'll just kind of show you some of the things that ecologists like to study whenever they're studying populations. All right, so first, the definition of ecology is going to be the study of the interactions between organisms and their environment. And what that means is we're going to take the biotic and abiotic factors of an ecosystem and study how they interact. And I'm pausing a little bit just because I know that some people want to be writing this down because you're using the fill in the blank notes that I sent you on the first day of distance learning. And I'm looking at those as I go just to kind of make sure that I'm not going too fast. And so you may want to pause right now and write in a minute when I stop talking and write some of these things down. Biotic would be the living and abiotic would be the non-living factors. So obviously living would be the organisms and their behavior. When we talked about animal behavior before and the interactions between organisms, and I gave you the exercise of communication between elephants, that is something that ecologists would study, or environmental biologists or environmentalists would study, is the interactions between organisms like that elephant communication, which I think a lot of students found interesting. I got a lot of really good feedback on that activity. HHMI stuff is really great. I really love it. And then your abiotic factors are going to be your non-living factors like climate, salinity, sunlight, and soil. All right, and so just like we have an anatomical hierarchy, so if you can recall, the hierarchy of anatomy would be cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems make up organisms. This is where we can kind of further that hierarchy. Organisms are going to make up populations. And remember, we've discussed the definition of a population would be a group of individuals of the same species that live in the same area and are able to reproduce, breed and reproduce viable, fertile offspring. Populations are going to make up communities. Communities make up the ecosystem. And so once we go from community to ecosystem, we are now incorporating those physical factors like temperature, terrain, water availability, and all of those things. Ecosystems are going to make up the landscape. The landscape is the mosaic of connected ecosystems. And then all of the landscapes are going to come together to make up the biosphere, which is the global ecosystem, which is basically Earth, the whole thing. All right. And so this picture it's just showing you how we go from organism to population to community, ecosystem, landscape, and then global. And so all of these different levels, these are different levels of study that ecologists are going to focus on. All right, so the most significant influence on the distribution of organisms is going to be climate. And climate, as I'm sure you all know, and I'm going to go over some slides that is very obvious to all of you, but just for completion's sake, I do want to talk a little bit about climate and how that contributes to the distribution of organisms and also the characteristics of each biome. So climate is basically weather, but it's long-term prevailing weather conditions in a particular area. And when we describe climate, we're going to take into consideration temperature, the amount of precipitation, intensity of sunlight, and wind. We have a macroclimate and a microclimate. Macroclimate is going to be your large-scale, seasonal, regional, or local level. So when we're discussing macroclimate, we would say the macroclimate of San Antonio is going to be pretty warm, somewhat humid at certain times, although if you go into certain parts of the hill country, it is actually pretty dry, but a little bit more humid than some of your hill country area. Microclimate is going to be your really small scale. So if macroclimate would be the description of the climate of San Antonio, microclimate would be if I go into my backyard in San Antonio and I lift up a log. So the microclimate under that log would probably be cool and damp. And so depending on that microclimate, certain organisms are going to live there. And so why do we care about climate change? Well, we care about climate change because if it shifts too rapidly, it doesn't give time for evolution to take place. Some species are not going to survive. And we talked about yesterday in our Zoom meeting how biodiversity is really important, not only from the aspect of, well, I feel sad when the polar bears don't have somewhere to live, or I feel sad when all of the lions die, or something like that, or I feel sad. Hey, I finished watching Tiger King and I learned that I feel sad when most of the tigers on Earth are actually in captivity. More are in captivity than are actually in the wild. And I'm just wondering, why Carol Baskin doesn't go ahead and just release all those tigers into the wild. Like, is she really doing any better than Joe Exotic by keeping them in cages? But anyway, that's for another discussion. But that makes me feel sad. And so that's called biophilia, which is this innate desire to connect with nature. And so besides that biophilia and those emotional feelings towards biodiversity, we also have a more practical use for it, which is because of biodiversity, there are a number of things out there that have yet to be discovered. And it always comes back to medicine, and it always comes back to the survival of humans. If plants die off and we don't preserve these ecosystems, there are products that are actually sitting in those ecosystems that have yet to be discovered. We need to make sure that everything stays alive so that we can discover those things and use them for our benefit as humans. I don't know if that's such a great thing, but I know when I'm sick and I want to take medication, it is. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's a good thing. Let's keep everything alive, but then also use them. We could have like a symbiotic relationship, right? This is just obvious stuff. So climate is going to be determined by things like light intensity. So depending on where a land mass is, light's going to hit at a different angle. And we all know that the more intense the sunlight, the hotter it is, right? Climate is going to be affected by air circulation and precipitation patterns. So the more rain there is, the more green you have, and usually the more green you have, the more biodiverse it is going to be. So if you think about the tundra, it's cold, it's also very dry, and there aren't very many plants there. There's also not very much animal life there. And so when I think of the highest precipitation, I think of the tropical rainforest, really, really biodiverse area. All right, ocean currents are going to have an effect on climate. It's going to have an effect on the distribution of species because ocean currents are going to have an effect on water temperature. All right. Mountain ranges are going to affect ecosystems and the distribution of ecosystems and the distribution of species. If you see right here, you have your mountain range. On this side, which is the ocean side, you have a lot of rainfall. And because you have a lot of rainfall, you have a lot of green area. And because there's a lot of green, there's a lot more potential for animal life and plant life, right? On the leeward side of the mountain, which is on the opposite side of where the ocean is, you aren't going to have, because this mountain range is basically blocking precipitation from moving over. So on the leeward side of the mountain, you're going to have your desert, your really dry areas where not as many plants and animals can live. All right, and this picture right here is just going to show you all of the distribution of the different biomes, and depending on where that land mass is, how the oceans are circulating, the precipitation pattern, the sunlight intensity, you are going to get a different type of biome. So I want to just kind of pause a little bit just in case someone needs to write. If you're wondering what you should have written under seasonality and bodies of water, I just would have written, seasonality, sunlight is going to probably have a big effect on seasonality. And depending on seasonality, you're going to have a different distribution of species that are able to survive in that temperature and in that climate. And then under bodies of water, I would just say, obviously, the availability of bodies of water, and then the ocean currents are going to have an effect on water temperature. Okay, and then we get to that next picture, which shows the distribution of biomes. On your Socrative, I'm not going to ask you where each biome is. I would probably just give you some pretty obvious questions about the biomes. So what determines the characteristics of a biome? It's going to be climate and elevation. And then we have this neat little chart right here. It's called a climograph. A climograph, on the y-axis, you're going to have your temperature, and on your x-axis, you're going to have precipitation. A lot of times College Board liked to, and I did too, would give a question where I take the names of the biomes off and I give the climograph, and I would label this A, B, C, D, E, F, and I would ask which biome would A be? And so would which biome is A? I don't want to say A, B. And so you would look under here and you would see, well, this biome right here, it's going to span a range. That's why it's like this big blob. It's spanning a range of precipitation, but I would definitely say this is a lot of precipitation. And then you look over on this side and it's hot. So where do you see a lot of precipitation and it's hot? The tropical rainforest. And then over here on this part of the climograph, you see the desert doesn't really have a wide range of precipitation, but it kind of has a little bit of range in temperature, because I think we all know that it gets a lot cooler at night in the desert. And then there's a pretty wide range of temperature, especially when the sun comes up, it gets a lot hotter. And so that's what a climograph is used for. And then I'm just going to go through several pictures of different biomes. The tropical rainforest is going, like I said, it's going to have high rainfall, high temperatures. Deserts is going to have low rainfall and higher temperatures with a little bit of a range. And then it's just showing you where you're going to see these different biomes on Earth. Savanna, when I think of savanna, I do think of Africa. So you're going to see South America, Africa, and other parts. Chaparral, I think of California, like the hills of California. Temperate grassland, I think of like the North and South Dakota. This is where the buffaloes are going to roam and whatnot. A little bit cool, maybe. Northern coniferous forest, that's going to be your Canada area. That's what I think of. Pine trees, really cold. Temperate broadleaf forest, that's going to be your, when I see that, I think of like Vermont and where they're going to make maple syrup. And of course, in North Carolina, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in North Carolina. It's really, really pretty. Tundra, you think more Alaska. And then we get into our aquatic biomes like lakes, wetlands. When I think of wetlands, I think of the Bayou of Louisiana. Streams and rivers, estuaries, and if your class yesterday had someone present on estuary, that's where the freshwater and the saltwater are going to meet. And the human impact on estuaries is going to be a lot of pollution. Intertidal zone. Intertidal zone is one of my favorite. This is like one of the harshest biomes there is. And you'll see your barnacles and your mollusks and your sea stars and stuff like that. You have your ocean pelagic zone, your open water. Coral reefs, and human impact on coral reefs is really going to be mostly that scuba divers go down and they touch the coral reefs. And if anyone's gotten training in scuba diving, you know how difficult it can be, especially if you're not weighted correctly. And a lot of the scuba diving people that are leading are not going to put your weights in correctly, and you're just kind of flailing all over the place. And so it's not very easy to not touch the coral reefs, but that does damage them. Marine benthic zones are going to be your deep sea hydrothermal vents. Deep sea hydrothermal vents are really interesting because this is where your chemotrophs are going to live, the bacteria that is going to survive on on chemicals. So they're going to create ATP out of things like sulfur. Right, and so the biogeography would be the geographic distribution of species, and that's affected by several different factors. And so some of these are going to be the dispersal, which could be the movement away from an area of origin, whether that be accidental or intentional. Behavior, certain organisms are going to have different behavior that's going to determine their habitat selection. Biotic factors and abiotic factors. And really what I want you to take away from this slide right here is that all of these things are going to have an effect on survival. And I think that's pretty obvious. All right, I'm going to touch a little bit on population ecology. I do have 5 minutes left. So population ecology, remember a population is going to be your group of individuals of a single species that live in the same area. They're able to reproduce and produce viable, fertile offspring. And that reminds me of that chapter where we talked about the different pre-zygotic and post-zygotic barriers and the different types of hybrids that can get made, like a liger, a lion, and a tiger. Those are considered two different species and two different populations because although they can breed and produce offspring, they're most likely not going to do that. And so when ecologists study populations, they are studying things like density, number of individuals in the area, and the dispersion, the pattern of spacing in between. And so one of the activities, and anyone that takes APES or is going to, if you're a junior and you're planning on taking APES next year, or you have taken APES, this is one of the things that you would do in Mr. Kaesner's class. It is determining population size and density. So there's 3 ways that you can determine the population size. You can count every individual, which is not a very convenient thing to do. You can do random sampling, or you can do something called a mark recapture method. So let's say I want to find out what the population, I always use this example and it grosses everybody out, but I don't care. At my old school, we had this problem with, we had a problem with roaches at my old school. It was very disturbing. And so if I went around the school and I captured 10 roaches, all right, and I marked them with nail polish on their back, okay, and then I let them go, and then I randomly captured another group of roaches, let's say a couple of days later. Depending on the number in that new subset, depending on the number that have nail polish on their back, I can actually do a calculation that would tell me the entire population in the school, which is actually kind of cool. And I'm not going to go through the math in that, but just so you know, I want you to know just from this slide that mark recapture is the best, most convenient way of determining a population size. So you capture an initial population, you mark them, you release them. A day or 2 later, you come back, you capture another population, and you count how many have the marking on them. And depending how many have the marking on them in the entire new population, you can do a math equation that will actually tell you the entire population size. So actually kind of cool. That's the most reliable method. And then we can, population ecologists are going to study things like patterns of dispersal. Is there a clumped dispersal like these sea stars? They're most commonly going to clump near required resources. Is there a uniform dispersal, kind of like these penguins? This is usually going to be an antagonistic, really territorial type of dispersion. And then you can just have random, unpredictable spacing like these flowers right here. So just something that population ecologists like to study, dispersion. All right. And then, so that's population size, determining population size and density, and then patterns of dispersal. And I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop right there for today because demography, talking about birth and death and life tables, I'm going to go ahead and touch on tomorrow. So I hope you guys are having a great day, and I hope that you're getting something from this. If anything, for those of you that are majoring in biology, some of these things will come up in your biology classes when you go off to college, and I want you just to have a little bit of a reference to them, like, oh yeah, this is what she was talking about that time that I was watching this lecture. All right, and so I will continue with demography and life tables and all of that fun stuff tomorrow. Remember that HHMI for the honeybee HHMI would be due on Thursday, and then tomorrow I will give you the Socrative and the second lecture, and that will also be due on Thursday, and that will be the end of our content, and then we'll study test prep after that. All right, guys, have a great day.